Okay, so 5.15 is going to be about sustainable agriculture. And the first piece of sustainable agriculture is conserving the soil. And so these are agricultural techniques that minimize soil erosion. It's actually a not very good fact that the US is losing topsoil to erosion 10 times faster than the soil actually forms. And so that's a major problem. Soil conservation prevents the loss of the nutrients that's in the topsoil, the moisture of the soil itself, the decomposers that we actually find in the topsoil. So that would include all of the bacteria, the insects, the worms, and then the organic matter that traps the soil matter or soil moisture. So the leaf material, the decaying tree and plant material, all of that is part of what soil conservation is. And so there's various ways that this can be achieved through sustainable agricultural practices. The first is through contour plowing. Contour plowing is plowing parallel to the natural slope of the land instead of moving down slopes. This actually prevents water runoff and the soil erosion. So you can see a nice picture here where you are actually running parallel to those slopes. And then again, this would prevent that erosion and water runoff. It forms many terraces that catch the water running off, thus conserving both the soil and the water. So this is very beneficial and should be used more. Now you can see it is a little less efficient for the farmer. It's going to take a bit more time, but in the long run, it actually is better for the environment, which improving the environment of the farm where the crops are planted is actually really beneficial to the farmer in the long run. The second agricultural practice is something that is called terracing. This is where you actually cut flat platforms of soil into a steep slope. So, if you are planting on any kind of a slope, this can be achieved. And the flatness of the terraces actually catch water and prevent it from becoming runoff. And if we're preventing runoff, then we're preventing that soil from being eroded as well. Using the concept of perennial crops, this is when you use crops that live year round and they're harvested numerous times. This can actually establish more established root systems. And we can see here when we just plant annual crops, the roots get very shallow. But when we use perennial crops, these roots actually grow much more deeply in the soil, which holds the soil together better and thus prevents erosion. So it also prevents having bare soil between harvests. And that is important because we get less weeds. And if there's also bare soil and there's nothing growing there, we get a lot more erosion. So all of this is to preserve the soil. All right, so other sustainable practices include using windbreaks. So you can actually plant trees or other plants that can block the wind. And this, you can see this line of trees here beside this field. That's going to cut down on the wind, which thus would cut down on the soil that gets blown off the land. This can be used as a source. These trees can actually be used as a source of firewood, or you could actually plant fruiting trees and then use the fruit for income. It also provides habitat for the pollinators, which are really going to be important for pollinating your crops. And it provides habitat for other species, and it does create like island that those habitat island or island habitats throughout, but that's actually a nice place for organisms that would have no other place to live. So, and then you can see here how the wind just kind of blows over top of the tree, and kind of, blows up and then kind of skips the land on the other side. So that's really nice. nutrients. Okay. All right. No-till farming. Usually after a harvest, farmers will come through, they'll till the land, and the leftover crop that's there, the dead plant material gets tilled up. But if you use no-till farming, you actually leave the leftover crop, the remains in the soil, instead of tilling it under the soil. And this actually adds organic matter to the soil. It provides like a soil cover over top of the soil so that nutrients and moisture stay down within the soil itself. It prevents erosion from the loosened soil. And you can see here that it actually, when it's tilled, you can see what happens. Air breaks into the soil. It compacts the soil. We actually get a loss of soil through erosion because of increased erosion here. The soil can crust, all kinds of negative impacts from tilling. With no till, we actually get this nice organic layer here. Water and moisture stays within the soil and obviously reduced runoff. Another method of sustainable agricultural practice is called strip cropping. Another name for it is intercropping. It's where you alternate the rows of dense crops with rows of less dense crops. So you'll have things like hay and wheat planted beside rows of corn or soybeans or cotton. This actually prevents runoff from eroding soil because those less dense crops have a lot more exposed soil, which can be washed away. So those dense crops, the hay, the wheat, actually prevent there from being a lot of exposed soil. So just another method that we can use to preserve that soil, to conserve the soil. All right, another sustainable agriculture practice needs or that improves the environmental consequences of farming is improving soil fertility. And this is a method of using different methods to restore the nutrient levels in the soil. So those nutrient levels include things like nitrogen, like phosphorus, calcium, magnesium. And the first thing that we can do is something called crop rotation. Crop rotation is when we replant the same crops. Um, or when we don't replant the same crops. That's So in the past, that is what farmers have done. They've replanted the same crops continuously over and over and over. And this depletes the soil of those very important nutrients. Crop rotation actually allows the soil to recover from nitrogen demanding crops like corn. And if you replace it or rotate it with a crop like a soybean, soybeans actually have nitrogen fixing bacteria on their root systems, which puts all those nutrients back into the ground. So soybeans do that, peas will do that. They all have those nitrogen fixing bacteria in their root nodules that we learned about in unit 4. No, I'm sorry, unit 1, when we talked about biogeochemical cycles. So you want to rotate with some sort of a nitrogen demanding crop or nitrogen fixing crop. Okay, using green manure, which is a leftover plant matter from a cover crop. It's a crop that's planted in the off season between harvest and replanting of the main crop in your field. Cover crops can actually stabilize the soil, which limits topsoil erosion. And then the remains of those cover crops can be ground up and left as a green manure left on the field. And this is just going to be covering the field with that organic matter that's going to hold in moisture, like we talked about previously, and also return the nutrients from the dying green plant material back into the soil. Okay, so here's an example of that. Something that's grown in the winter, and then we're going to come through. We're going to basically cut it like you would a lawn with a big lawnmower, and then leave this biomass all clipped up like you would your lawn clippings and allow it to fertilize the soil. All right, using limestone. Limestone releases calcium carbonate, which is a basic material, and it's going to neutralize the effects of any type of acid or acidic soil. And so acidic soil tends to have, or it does have, a high hydrogen ion concentration, and it causes nutrients to leach out of the soil. And so, in order to keep nutrients in the soil, adding limestone causes that soil to become basic. And once it is basic, then those um, soils do not leach out. And acidic soil also makes toxic metals like aluminum more soluble in soil. And so, if we had more basic soil, that would not be the case. And so, a lot of those toxic metals would not stay in the soil. Calcium is also needed as a plant nutrient. So it's really, this is kind of a win-win to add limestone. It's good for the soil, it's good for the plants as well. And so that's just another good practice to use in agricultural method or agricultural situations. Okay, rotational grazing. So, this is when you regularly rotate the livestock in your pasture lands to different areas to prevent overgrazing. Overgrazing, like we've talked about before, can actually kill plants. It compacts the soil from the animals always tromping on the soil. And both of those things can lead to erosion of the topsoil. Rotational grazing can actually promote pasture growth at a faster rate than a normal rate because you have organisms feeding on different types or heights of plants. So that's really important. And it clips the grass back to a length where the growth is the fastest. It encourages a deeper root growth, which again, deeper roots are going to hold soil better in its place. And so here you can just kind of see how it's like an exponential growth pattern when you use that rotational grazing. And I think I've shown this picture before in some previous notes. Okay, let's move on to the practice FRQ for this section. Describe two soil conservation strategies that could be used to prevent soil erosion in agricultural fields that are established in this landscape. Okay, that's it for the 5.15 notes, and I'll see you guys next time.